people have not understand that the dollar is just not going to continue forever. In fact, statistically, it continues to decline. It's now, some people say it just in the mid 50% usage in the world, when at one time it was 80 or 90. Wall Street's never going to embrace gold because they've always treated it like kryptonite. And the main reason is they can't make a lot of money with it. They can't flip it, change it, put it here, put it there, go to that, go to this. All the buying of central banks. If they're not going to be using it for a purpose, who do they flip it to make money on? There is nobody to flip it.
This is Little by Little with Andy Schechtman.
All right, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Little by Little. I couldn't tell you how psyched I am to have Peter Grandich on with me. I've been on Peter's show a few times, and he's an exceptional man. Peter, I hold you in very high esteem. You are one of the good guys in the 35 years I've been in this industry, one of the real good guys, and it's a true honor to have you on here with me today. How you doing, buddy? Good to see you.
Well, I'm doing great. It's a little bit different on this side. I always look so much forward to speaking to you, and you're never lost for words. So you're one of the best guests anybody could have. And but it's nice to speak with you. And I must tell people up front, it was you who confirmed me staying in gold and also getting very involved behind the BRICS thought. About 3 years ago, you did I think an interview, might have been Kiko, could have been somebody else. And I was already long gold but in 2021, Andy, I literally sold all my stocks but one to buy gold. And when you're alone or near alone out there, and you just keep hearing the opposite and everything, it's hard to stay. And like I said, I caught your interview, and that made me reach out to you and speak to you, and then of course start interviewing you. So I'm as much pleased to be here as you are supposedly to have me.
Well, God bless you for such kind words. And I listened to an interview that you just did. You call it your swan song for conferences, where you mentioned that you went all in as a lone wolf. And I understand the concept of being a lone wolf. I was talking about the BRICS in 2019 and 2020. Everyone thought I was crazy. My wife said, Andy, you keep saying the same stuff. I said, yeah, but no one's talking about it. Well, maybe you're wrong. And I'm like, geez, am I? I think people like you and I do the best we can to speak our mind and do it in a way that we hope helps people, right or wrong. I've never ascribed to be the smartest guy in the room. I am sincere. I spend a lot of time studying and researching, as do you. And to hear someone of your stature say that, it's one of the greatest things I could ever hear. It's a compliment beyond compliments, and thank you for saying that to me. You've made my day, to say the least. So that means a lot to me. I appreciate that. Let's jump right into the weeds, but I'm going to ask you a question different from anything that I've ever spoken with you about. When I first met you, you've always had the football up there and talked about the New York Jets and the people you've known. I think it was Joe Klecko. I think you work with legendary sports athletes, and sports has defined my life. It's meant more to me than anything, really. I can't imagine my life without athletics, baseball, softball all around North America into my 40s, traveled all over through Canada and the U.S. Golf to this day, skiing. I just got back from a trip. Basketball, you name it. I played it 4 days a week most of my life. Anything with a ball or a sport, I loved and still do to this day. You've worked with some of the biggest and most legendary sport athletes there is, pro athletes. Who left the biggest impression on you and why?
Well, yeah, in just after 2000, I was asked to form a Christian-based financial advisory service that would service professional athletes by a gentleman who had been on the first two New York Giants Super Bowl team. And I was a diehard Jet fan at the time, and he was a New York Giant. And when he asked me, my response to him, you like this, was, you couldn't possibly want me to work with you because I used to root I used to root for you to drop the ball and die. So his name was Lee Roussan, and we began and within a year, I found myself within the confines of the New York Giants inner circle, where I was doing Bible study, chapel, fellowshipping, and then getting to know the players. And many of them clearly young enough to be my sons and eventually grandsons. But it allowed an entree into the sports world that wasn't targeted. It wasn't something like I was sitting as a financial guy and I want to get athletes as clients. It just evolved that way. And in terms of meaning the most to me, you mentioned it. My father, I became a Jet fan because in 1969, they won the Super Bowl. My father was a Jet fan. I'm 13 years old and I started rooting for them. And it's been basically misery since then. So when I would get a chance to meet Joe Klecko, who was my father's biggest hero of the time that he played for the Jets, just went into the Hall of Fame finally a couple of years ago. He has been the most to me because our relationship went way past sports. Like me, he's a devout Catholic and he spends more time about his faith than he does sports, which shocks people because they just know him from his movies and all that kind of stuff. But personally to me, and helping me become a better man through some of the toughest times in my life, I've had 3 huge battles with depression, Andy. 2 of them caused hospitalization, and Klecko and some others were there for that. And so from a sports person, he would be really the number one person, I would say. And I'll just tell you this, just so everybody knows, they put their pant legs one leg on the time, just like we do. And some of them have more problems or more messed up than we'll ever be. So don't assume from what you see and some of the things now, especially because sports has become so much more socially and politically involved. What led to me to leave the business, Andy, I shut a very profitable business in 2021 because of how much wokeness came into the sports world, and it clashed with my faith to the point that I had to make a choice between one and the other. But the athletes themselves have a platform and an ability to speak to people or at least get people interested, just unlike just about any other profession. And from the ones that were involved in the Christian end of it, they used their gift and still do. But unfortunately, politics and social stuff overtaken the NFL. I'll tell you something, man. I don't mean to ramble on, but this is important. I chose not to watch the Super Bowl this year. Well, it helped that I wasn't a fan of either team, but realistically, because the social rising of a different national anthem to be played just before our own national anthem, I don't want to support an organization that's going to bring something like that to the forefront. So I chose not to watch it. And, if it was the Jets playing the Giants, might have that been a tougher decision? Yeah, it might have been tougher, but sports have been invaded. You still hear older people getting mad, all the players. It's not what it was like you remember in the 50s and 60s and 70s. Joe Klecko, after his first year playing for the Jets, he drove a truck in the offseason. So it's come a long way. So I thank you for that. But that part of my life ended. I still stay friends with some, and I do an occasional stuff. But the sports world, what it is now and what it was 30, 40 years ago, the only thing remotely out of the 4 major sports, I know you're a big basketball fan. The only one that hasn't been totally infiltrated is hockey. Hockey still is much like it was 20 or 30 years ago. The rest, especially basketball and football, the social and political aspects now are in the forefront of that business.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. It's interesting. Juan Soto, who left the Yankees, I think, to go to the Mets, just signed a $51 million a year contract. I remember when Kirby Puckett in 1988 became the highest paid athlete in sports history at $3 million a year. Things certainly are changing. And you're right, the platform for these athletes to speak, sometimes I wish they wouldn't. Like LeBron James, just play basketball. I don't want to hear about all your social viewpoints. But you're right. I mean, it could also be a platform for good. No question about it. But I respect someone who stood firm on his ideals and his principles and shuttered what would have been an increasingly profitable business. But it's striking when you hear a pro football player was driving a truck in the off season to make ends meet when guys are making. You look at Joe Burrow. I looked at his contract. I was sitting in a restaurant the other day with the guy, and we were looking at the contract he signed. And the year before, or the year after he signed it, he got hurt right away. But the year before, we took the number of pass attempts and divided it into his yearly contract, and it worked out to like $85,000 per pass attempt. Different times, to say the least. Well, one more question on sports, but this could really, I think, be broadened out to just about anybody. And that would be, what's one piece of financial advice that every young athlete should know before making their first $1 million? What would you advise them going back, knowing what you know now?
So my partner, as I said, named Lee Roussan, until a few years ago, NFL contracts weren't fully guaranteed. And so he used to say to players, the NFL stands for not for long. They were one injury away from. But what's lost in all of this is, if you I know you got a fancy to Minnesota, you were up there. If you ask the most hardened, even Eagles fan right now that won the Super Bowl, name all 53 players on this roster. Some may get to 30 or 35, but they'll never get to 53. And the reason I bring that up is 80% of NFL players never qualify for the pension. They never play long enough, the 4 years. Some play just 1 or 2 years. Some just make practice squads, whatever, which is okay money, don't get me wrong, but it's not retirement money. And so what I would just tell them, even those that make that level, is there's life after football. And only a handful can live off what they make. Now, of course, that's changed a lot. You talked about baseball now. Even hockey salaries are going up now. They are making money for life type of investments. But you're still hearing even people that fit that description still end up losing all of it, or most of it. And that's even with a token. The NFL started a certification program 20 years ago. I had to be part of it when we were dealing with them and all. But all it really does is kind of check your history and make sure you're licensed and all that kind of stuff. And they bring the rookies in to a 2 or 3 day seminar. But basically, the top players get cared for. The first round, second round, their agents bringing in financial advisors, legal and all. The rest of the players, they may have a lawyer to do the contract, but they're left to be on their own. And they're the most vulnerable, because here's what happens, and I've seen it so much, we could spend hours talking about it. Second and third cousins show up with the great business scheme ideas, and also investments now. The big thing that, I still talk to a couple agents that I was friends with. So many have gotten into cryptos. They're trying to bring out meme coins in their own names now, some of the big stars, because they realize how much overnight. Look what the Trumps did overnight. So if you got a real big name out there now and you came out with a meme coin, So what I would like to say to them is that there's more to it afterwards. It just is not, you haven't reached the peak. But I used to tell the younger players, the second or third string guys, hey, listen, I just want you to know you're in the top 1/10 to 1% of earners in the world. Don't get caught up with the guy over there that's making 50 million and you're making 2. Your 2 million still puts you ahead of 99% of all the people. Don't fall down that list. You've been given a blessing beyond measurable, and make the most of it. But when you're young, just like I was young, and you now the social aspect, you talked about Joe Klecko. Joe Klecko likes to tell the story. Yeah, he had to drive a truck, but here he was in 1981. He was Defensive Player of the Year. He had 20 and a half sacks. We imagine now if he did that same thing, what he would be paid for that and all. But he says that he's so grateful with it and all, because a lot of these people are getting spoiled and losing their souls based on getting so caught up in the money. Listen, I understand the fame. It looks great and all, but know that about 80% of those players, especially on football, they're not killing it where, they're going to sit on the money for the rest of their lives. And they're going to have to work after that. And that's why also, just so you know, the NFL did start something even better than the certificate program. Every team has now a player development personnel. Dave Zott, a good friend of mine, has been it now for the Jets for almost 20 years. His job is to solely work with the players about a career after football. Now, Aaron Rodgers was not going in for those meetings, okay? But the third string tight end and the guys on the player squad, they needed that, and so hopefully they'll have and they can make good. Because remember this, Andy, and I'll stop because I can go with you for sports for hours. If they made it to the NFL or the NBA and all, and even if they were second or third string, they were phenomenal athletes. They were the best in high school. They were the best in college, because that's why you hear about guys, they played 14 years in the NHL, but he wasn't great. And I go, are you kidding me? 14 years he managed to stay in the NHL? Let me tell you something. He was damn good. He could beat 98% of the rest of the hockey players.
Yeah, imagine him in a pickup game at the local rink. I agree. It's funny. I mean, there always are exceptions to that rule. I have a very good friend who was best friends with Craig Counsell growing up. Craig Counsell grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He said he wasn't the best athlete on the baseball team and high school, and walked on to Notre Dame, and then ended up winning a World Series and spending 16 or 17 years in pro baseball and then being a manager. But that would be an outlier. I would agree with you. The wisdom that you are imparting here, I would hope that they still call on you from time to time and ask you to come in and give talks to these people, because it's smart when you realize that you only get so many chances in life. My father always said to me, it's much easier to make money than it is to keep it. And I think that's probably exemplified in pro sports. But following that thread, but no longer talking about pro sports, I just had to ask, I've always wondered about your background in sports, and we've talked a little bit about it. Thank you for sharing. You were a financial advisor for decades. And if you were advising someone today, maybe a young person, doesn't have to be a pro athlete, with no investments today, what would you tell them to do first?
Oh boy, so this is the motto I've had for about 20 years, because I've made and lost millions not once but twice. So I think I can speak from both sides of the coin, Andy. I've adopted a less is more attitude. Part of the reason that America's in the problem that it has is because on a much bigger scale, we spent more than we made. That's the end of the day, a lot more. Well, still 7 or 8 out of 10 families that we see in the planning group that I'm still a part are still in that boat. They're spending more than they're making. And people say, well, how do they do that? Well, they borrow. B, they defer maintenance, so to speak, to their homes, to themselves. They have a bunch of car leases outside or payments, to drive a fancy car and all, where if they had lesser, they would be cash flow positive. And they've also bought into this falsehood, which I don't know was all purposely done or a mixture between Madison Avenue and Wall Street. And that is, more money is going to equal more happiness. That the guy driving the bus can never be happier than the guy that owns the bus company. That's what they would like you to believe. The fact remains, in real life, more of the happier people that I met are people with little or no means. And some of the wealthiest people I knew, whether they were athletes or rich business owners, were some of the most unhappy people I met. So I think perspective to understand on what's really important, and to understand getting cash flow positive. The biggest kick on us, if a 10-second commercial about our planning group, is we believe cash flow is the key, not chasing net worth. Show me a successful business person, show me a successful real estate person, whatever. They manage their cash flow properly. So being as efficient, as effective as you can be, which most people aren't, is a good starting ground before you start thinking, how could I turn $1 into 2, 3, or 4, or some investment that'll give me the idea. The other thing I'll tell you is that more times than not, your best asset is yourself. So in all the years that I've met, I've met only a handful of people that walk up to you and go, yeah, mom and dad put a few thousand into the stock market every year and they walked away with a couple of million. What I normally learn is they either inherited it, they were small to mid-sized business owners, they invested in commercial real estate. Where the financial world came about, they either were in the financial service business or they worked for a publicly held company where they got a fair batch of stock options and were able to exercise it. The stock market, despite all the hoopla and all and everything, it's a lot tougher than it looks. A lot more people have to lose from a smaller percentage to win. And I think it's 1,000 times tougher now than it was when I first entered the business 40 years ago.
Yeah, I listened to your interview talking about passive income vehicles, which was incredibly interesting and illuminating when you talk about, you were saying when you were in the industry earlier, the majority of your business was from individuals, and now it's the opposite of that, or maybe it wasn't your business, just business that was being done within the stock market or investing, and now it's institutional. It's these passive funds. I found it very interesting. People should check that out, especially those that are interested in the stock market. They may look at things a little bit differently. It kind of opened my eyes immediately. I listened to it last night. I'm like, wow, that's fascinating. I didn't understand that, but again, very interesting, and I appreciate your take on that. Let's shift gears just a tiny bit. You are not shy and quite vocal about not being a Bitcoin fan. What is your biggest issue with Bitcoin?
With my hand on the Bible, it's their savior, Michael Saylor. So a few years back, when Bitcoin, let's take a step back. Bitcoin has followed the path much broadly and much more explosive than what the penny stock market was in the 70s, 80s, and into the 90s. How the penny stock market used to work was a handful of small people get involved with a very low price thing, trade it, bring a few friends in, get it pumped up, and then tell the world it's about to go to the moon and have them run it up, and they would exit from that. That was the standard. That's what the Wolf of Wall Street is really about when you take it out and all in all. So here was this guy, so everybody likes to go, oh, Bitcoin's up 60,000%. Yeah, how many people shared in that 60,000? The public really started getting involved about 4 or 5 years ago in general, and basically when it was in the tens of thousands of dollar price. Okay, so this guy comes along and he starts saying what I thought, what used to be, at least when I was in the business, the absolute red flag or red flags. Sell your stocks, sell your bonds, sell your real estate, sell your business, sell your home, borrow if you have to, and put it in this thing. And by the way, not different types of those things, just that thing. That's a non-starter right there. If you came across, which you've never done, and said, people, sell your stocks, sell your bonds, sell your this, and just buy gold. That's all I want. You'd be as bad to me as what that person was. So if you ask me, that was the original turnoff to it. And I've learned bet against people like that, not on people like that. And then I seen others come out and kind of follow that line, a guy named Kaiser and a few others that are really just with no regard and it's infallible. There's no way this can miss, no concern about that. See, I seen losses myself. I had them myself. I know I had clients that lost because of what I said or what I did and so forth and so on. And you have to be unconscionable to say something like that, knowing full well in reality, that's not true. But what bothered me the most, Andy, is that the financial so-called journalist out there embraced it, didn't challenge it, and then embraced it. And then because of what's transpired, elevated to now, he's like one of the Mavericks, that might have been a JP Morgan or somebody like that was usually viewed at when they were first around. So that's the initial part of what kept me out of it. Now, when I had clients, and people know this for record, I said, if you want to toss dice, you want to go to the casino, you want to buy a penny stock, go ahead, buy Bitcoin. I wasn't, but don't treat it as the second coming, or like I say, I kept saying it can't top out until they tell me it cures cancer, because that's the only thing left that I don't think they have left to pull out. Because remember, this has been a product whose narrative has changed 4 or 5 times in the last 5 to 7 years. The cure-all, or the reason to own it, has changed. Now, they got smart, Andy. They got very smart, this group. They went out and 60 Minutes just ran a whole series on it 3 weeks ago. It's still online, showing how much money was spent by the crypto industry backing certain politicians, including this Loomis senator, who's basically out all day. She reminds me of the senator from the movie in The Godfather. And so I'm concerned that when something like that is backed by that type of, now, if I may, I like to say this half jokingly. When I was a young kid, they told us don't trust finks. Remember the kid that was always considered a fink? Well, there's a fink here involved in this who just 5 years ago said this is the most criminal, worst thing you could ever get near. I wouldn't touch it with a 100-foot pole. Then suddenly loved it. Now, did he love it because suddenly he realized that technology is suddenly improved, which it didn't. It didn't change. Nothing changed from 5 years ago from when he disliked it. What changed was he realized that his firm can make hundreds of millions of dollars, not a billion or more, with it and other things related to it. And my comment always has been, and I know I don't want to be on CNBC and all, but my comment always is, if you really believe that, sir, take all your payment in Bitcoin. Because they're still paying themselves some cash from that ETF and all. They're not taking it in Bitcoin. So that and other things. But I'll tell you what's worse than Bitcoin. Mem coins. Can you imagine? People want to say to me, they say to me, we're not in a speculative assets. No offense. I know I can say it on your show. If I had poo in this hand and a mem coin in this hand, it's the same thing. It has no value. There's nothing to it. You want to try to bid up poo? Let's call it the Peter Poo. And they did. They came out with the fart. They came close. They called it a fart. We have people now spending, some people betting large sums of money. And I'm not talking about very rich. I'm talking working class people on just the greater fool theory, Andy. Just that hopefully somebody will pay more for something that's worth nothing than I did. And that all ties into my overall mood and where we're at and how people think. And I can start going more into it. It's happening in sports betting. We're seeing so many people getting crushed now, betting sports, getting hooked on sports, unlike anything ever seen before and all. But that's the speculative excess that's in this world. And yet, and I'm singing to the choir, but I have to say this, drop a pin drop hearing somebody from those industry talking about gold, which just happens in the last 25 years has outperformed the two greatest things they've ever sold us, stocks and bonds. And yet there's a pin drop. So the long answer to it is I'll bet against it because of the people that are most behind it.
Yeah, a couple threads I'd like to pull on that. You mentioned Michael Saylor saying sell everything. He even went as far as saying the government, U.S. government, should sell all the gold held by the Federal Reserve. Hopefully it's still there. Which would depress the price of gold that all the other countries have been buying and use the proceeds to buy Bitcoin, which would enrich the United States. And I lost a little bit of respect, shall we say, when I heard that. I thought it was outlandish, and very self-serving, to say the least. And you mentioned one other thing that I find, to me, on a broader scale is a big problem with all of this, and that is this instant gratification not being fast enough, the get rich mentality, whether it be through sports betting or cryptocurrencies or whatnot, the meme coins, the not understanding of elbow grease and hard work and the laws of compounding, not just of interest, but of time and of effort, which has really defined my career. I always tell the story that when I was 19 years old, I started this company with my father. He said, you won't make the same mistakes that I made. You'll buy some silver or some gold every 2 weeks, period, or I'll fire you. Well, I've owned the company outright for over 2 decades. He won't fire me anymore, but I've honored my commitment to him. and for every 2 weeks for 35 years, this month represents 35 years, I bought something. And it's the greatest gift I've ever been given. It certainly wasn't the fast road to riches, but it allowed me to understand the laws of compounding of time and of effort and the significance of that. And to your point, for 25 years, gold has not only doubled the performance of the 10-year Treasury, but when you take the S&P 500 since 2000 and add dividends reinvested, it's averaged 9.6% per year versus 9.9 on the price of gold. Gold was up 30% last year. It doesn't get noticed. It's knocking on the door of 3,000. Doesn't get noticed because it's the tortoise and not the hare. It's not sexy. It's a pet rock that doesn't pay any interest. Evidently, most of the public who believes that has been fooled. As you know, you were saying recently, and I think I heard you say this on that podcast last night. Who's buying all the gold? Well, that would be the central banks. And who's not buying all the Bitcoin? Well, that would be the central banks. So when you have the most well-funded and well-informed traders in the world making the moves that they are to accumulate commodities like gold and silver, it certainly makes you think of a psyop or misdirection. And I appreciate your candor in that. I was always curious what it was, but you're right.
One thing, Andy, can I just add one thing?
Please.
Really important, sorry. And I call it Bitcoin. I don't call it Bitcoin. And so let's look at the company that he has used and remind you that his background is a checkered background. This isn't somebody that I think would win the Boy Scout award. He's had some serious issues in his past, including with the company. So he has this company now called Strategy. It was MicroStrategy. And in essence, he found what could be his golden goose, which I commend him for. As I say, I consider him the greatest snake oil salesman that ever walked on the earth in investment world. So he found this company, and he takes this company, a public company, by the way, that's supposed to report and act just like other public companies, and I'll get to that in a moment. And he able to borrow from people, buy the thing that he owns that helps push it up, and the pushing it up creates more money coming in. But what no one questions in that is, he's a public company. He's being interviewed by financial journalists and saying it's going to 3 million or 4 million. If I went on those same shows and started talking about my portfolio and the stocks that I had and started talking that they're going to be selling for 3 million or 4 million, they're only $2 now, I'd be called the greatest hypester in the world and all. That is the other concern of mine. And then the big question is, if all this buying is happening, because you cannot go 5 minutes on the internet without somebody coming on saying, I see, Bitcoin going to 1 million, 2 million. All these numbers are being thrown out. And it's a finite item. And all these machine guys, this Strategy's buying it, yet it really can't get out of its own way in the last year or two. Listen, I understand. Listen, it went from 70 to 100,000. That's great. Their stocks have done a lot better than that, Andy, in that same time and all. But they don't get the coverage or the hype they do. And let me tell you this, one thing I learned after 40 years, if people keep talking about something and it doesn't happen, it's like that boxer who gets in the first round. He shouldn't even be in the ring. On the 12th round, he's still there. Many times he ends up winning the fight. And I think, unfortunately, and I believe right now, and I put it up on my X page, it's tracing out a significant top. It has continued to make a series of lower highs, all while the same enthusiasm and, all this stuff is happening. And I'll tell you this much, if whoever may be listening to this, if you start seeing it below 90,000, there's some serious issues going to be for Bitcoin if that breaks below and stays for more than a day or two, because that's a level that I think is going to change a lot of people's mind and momentum and all these people that use it for chart. But as much as that is, I want you to know one thing. I'm not against the cryptocurrency theory. And I believe just like the dot-com bust, when the inevitable happens, there will be cryptocurrency type companies 10 or 20 years from now. I just don't think Bitcoin's one of it. In fact, I think their technology greatly lags. And so, it's something that people ask me, what would take it for you to buy it? I said, one of two things, the Jets and the Giants in the Super Bowl next year, or the second coming of Christ, either one.
Well, I wonder which one comes first.
It'll be the
maybe you can throw the Vikings into that equation too, and it probably wouldn't change the outcome very much. Peter, are we witnessing the end of the dollar's dominance, or do you think we can still fight back?
No, I listen. I bow and gracefully bow to your expertise and all and understanding. I wish you could spend 15 minutes to the world explaining what's happening with BRICS. People don't understand this. I'm a very simple guy. I wasn't a college person. I entered Wall Street, but I always been a blue collar guy working in a white collar business. But the simplicity is this, as I tell everybody, listen, for a lot of years, America has been a bully. Economically, politically, socially, militarily. And over the years, less and less people want to deal with it. It's not the same as it was 30 or 40 years ago. It's the same thing in mining now. If you look at mining, it's only about half the places you can go to where you might have went 20 or 30 years ago. So these countries, rightfully or wrong, whether you like their political agendas, whatever, have decided, starting with a small group, they listen, we might be better off working with ourselves. We shouldn't be just totally dependent on this big guy over here. And it's developed. And it went from a few countries to more and more. And they developed these systems and they've talked about it. No, listen, the only person that was saying, oh, they're coming out with a gold currency was some of the people, no respect, disrespect you, not you, that might sell gold stuff. There was no real serious talk among them that they were about to introduce, but it's like you, little by little by little. I use that now. I always give you credit for it. And the bottom line is, think about this. First, we abandoned our allies in Afghanistan. People don't realize that. I mean, I know a couple people very high up in military that said their military counterparts in the other countries were extremely disappointed in how we left them. Then there was a war. We called for one of the side's money to be frozen, and then we okayed and basically pushed for their enemy to get the interest. Now we got a guy that's in charge saying, if you don't play with me, I'm going to beat you to pulp. You're not going to be able to play with anybody. That's the greatest marketing card for the BRICS silently to go around. And they're smart enough. Listen, Russia, China, and all, they're no dummies. They didn't get to where they were because they're dummies. They know you can't get into a war with words with Trump, okay? But right behind closed doors, they're now showing all this, and they're showing what's happening here with these tariffs and all. People have not understand that the dollar is just not going to continue forever. In fact, statistically, it continues to decline. It's now, some people say it just in the mid 50% usage in the world, when at one time it was 80 or 90. And it's been the excuse for us to spend more and keep printing in the way we did and all. Now, I think one of the things that's going to come all of this is that when they come back to their meetings again, they're not going to beat their chest. They're not going to get into a war of words, but we're going to see them moving closer and doing more activity together. And if the tariffs don't work, which I don't expect them to, Andy, I'm open that maybe he knows something I don't know, but history doesn't support tariffs. No one seemingly won in wars when there were tariffs invoked. I still think it's a negotiating ploy of his. I don't think he plans on having 20, 25% tariffs 6 or 12 months from now. It's to get changes now. But I do think that people who don't understand the formation of the BRICS, the growth that it's already had in the few years that it's been going, and what it's set to do now going forward. And listen, Andy, we can beat our chest to the cows come home. Wall Street's never going to embrace gold because they've always treated it like kryptonite. And the main reason is they can't make a lot of money with it. They can't flip it, change it, put it here, put it there, go to that, go to this. And yet, so I don't ever expect or tell the public to turn on their general financial networks and hear people speaking about it. But it is a critical part of this change that's coming. Listen, Andy, do you have to be a rocket scientist? All the buying of central banks, if they're not going to be using it for a purpose, who do they flip it to make money on? There is nobody to flip it. They have to be the end user. There's not somebody hoping that they're going to pass this on so they can lock in profits on. And I think you've discussed enough, and anybody watching this doesn't need me to repeat what you've already shared. But the fact remains is they recognize the changes that are coming. And remember, it was not that long ago when they hated gold. And they didn't want it to be part of what it was. But they came to the conclusion of the indebtedness of the world and what's transpired. It's really their only way out longer term.
So maybe a topic for me to come on your show is a new theory I have about all of the gold that is being brought back into the from London into the COMEX vaults, record amounts. We've never seen this amount ever. Never. When I say never, the things that I've been saying the last 2 days, I would put on par with in 2019, the beginning of 4,000 videos on the BRICS that I've talked about when no one else was. I'm saying things that no one else has been saying, and I think I'm right. We should talk about that. We won't talk about it here today because it will take me 25 minutes to lay out the whole chain of events, but I will whet your appetite with one thing, well, maybe two or three. We have sent the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says he wants to monetize the liquid side of the assets on the asset side of the balance sheet. Well, what is liquid on the U.S. government balance sheet? Look at their assets. Student debt's number one, military is number two. You're not going to monetize either of those. There's land, there's gold. Gold's held in the revaluation account. We see all this metal being sent back. We wonder, is it the Trump tariffs or is it something deeper? Judy Shelton wants to issue treasuries backed by gold. Get this, a record 59,296 100-ounce gold contracts stood for delivery in the February contract on COMEX. That's over almost 13,000 contracts higher than the all-time record preceding it. That's 5,929,600 ounces of gold. JP Morgan says they're bringing back $4 billion in gold, and Blythe Masters, for the February contract, Blythe Masters, who used to run their gold desk, says, JP Morgan doesn't hold it for themselves. It's for a client. Who's got $4 billion? Who could that client be? Are the Trump tariffs a ruse to bring it all home, to do something bigger with gold? I'll whet your appetite. We should pick up and talk about that at another point. And you mentioned tariffs. Those aren't tariffs in my mind. A tariff is when you enact something to protect your manufacturing. If Trump says to the BRICS nations, if you try and continue to make a common currency, and as a aside, you're right, I focused on a common settlement currency, not a common BRICS currency, and a common settlement currency has already been announced by Dilma Rousseff, the former president of Brazil, the head of the new development bank for the BRICS. We've agreed to a common settlement currency, she says, 40% backed by gold, deliverable upon request, 60% BRICS plus currencies, traded over Enbridge. It's called the unit. We're moving in this direction, and what he is doing instead is issuing sanctions. Again, they haven't learned from their mistakes. Even Trump, all the good he's doing, that's not good. Those are sanctions masquerading as tariffs. If you don't do this, then we'll do this. I agree. And which really makes the question I was going to ask you kind of blasé, but I'll ask it anyway. Fast forward 10 years, is BRICS a dominant global force, or does U.S. find a way to hold its ground?
I think it's closer to dominance. And when I say dominance, because I continue to believe that China is moving in that direction to rival the United States. A lot will do with what Trump is able to do in the next 6 months. And here's why, Andy. Right now, it's mind-boggling. I mean, I'm so happy then, but I fear for his life to go in and show in a matter of a few weeks. And how long has this been going on? It's not just this past administration that I'm certain that was part of. It's been from both sides of the aisle. How much of this and how many people will this involve? And how could those people, in the sense, like I put up a gravy train today, he's talking about derailing their gravy train. And this is phenomenal. But why I say that is, as great as this is and as good as it looks like Trump has started out of the gate, if the economy still weakens, which some people think it's gonna, and I'm in that camp, and people's pocketbooks still are getting impacted, as good of all this is, he won't have that same political thrust that he has now. Congress is going to be in, less than 2 years, another election. And then if he doesn't have that same will and power, I just think that's the end of whatever hope you could have to be straightened. I'll say this much. I think this is very critical. I have three huge concerns, Andy. The first you and I shared dramatically, the debt. He's not going to help that situation. It's only going to get a lot worse than that, okay? And right now, people aren't looking at it because they're focused on this other stuff. But at the end of the day, that's the big gorilla in the room, the debt. The other crisis isn't spoken on Wall Street because it's one of their big livelihoods. But we have a huge retirement crisis, Andy. We have 2/3 of Americans working hard, but just paycheck to paycheck. And they're getting older and older, which makes it harder and harder to work. And they're not going to be able to reach those beautiful commercials that the brokerage firms run about spending your last quarter of your life playing golf and all that kind of stuff. And they're going to become a more and more financial burden and also demand government to help them. And then third, we have a infrastructure crisis. This is not talked at all. And I talked about it 2 years ago, including how much natural disasters. Now, I'm not into global warming and all that. I'm not arguing what's causing the natural disasters. I'm just telling you they're increasing dramatically for whatever reason. And the cost of that and the infrastructure. I'm in New Jersey. We don't have a day goes by now, if you hit the news, Google search, where more water main break hasn't happened in a town in Boston. Commerce stops because our water mains are about 75 to 100 years old. We have 100 bridges, over 100 bridges in New Jersey should be condemned. Steel cars and all are using them, but engineers say they should be condemned. We have 2 tunnels. Some people may know them, the Holland Tunnel and the Lincoln Tunnel. They're 100 years old. We have bridges that the trains, all the people that work in New Jersey to go to New York and back and forth, are in such bad shape they feel one day they may just fall into the water. But that's not just New Jersey alone. It's throughout the United States. It has been ignored. Everybody forgets this. When Bernanke and Obama came up with QE1, people forgot what was the main purpose of the money that was going to be spent: to fix America's infrastructure. That's why we have to create this money to put the economy back in great shape. And most of the money stayed on Wall Street. It never made it to Main Street.
Yeah, it's a real drag. If you think about it, the $200 billion we gave to the Ukraine, what could it have done for our infrastructure? The amount of money we're wasting. And you mentioned finding all this money. I find it so repugnant, the pushback by some of the Democrats to doing this and screaming and Elon is this and Elon is that and the name calling. I've had enough of it over the last 4 years. I want to scream at the TV. And God bless them for doing this, to showing how they've literally stole the hard-earned tax revenue, that we pay for these ridiculous, stupid things that they're doing, enriching all of themselves and fighting, pushing back as hard as possibly can publicly, the name calling and the swearing and the screaming that he's trying to do this, and the malfeasance that they're finding. I hope they all get what they deserve for doing this to the American people, and it's particularly awful. You mentioned the infrastructure. I went to the University of Minnesota, and I drove across the 35W bridge 1,000 times or more, and that bridge was a good 150, 200 feet above the Mississippi River, and bang, it goes into the water. And I'm like, geez, that could have been me. You're right. It kind of started the infrastructure, my viewing of the infrastructure way back then. And we've seen so many things since then. And when you realize that things like the tunnels and the subway and the water mains and all of these, especially on the East Coast, are that old, and the waste that we have spread around the world, all of these things that they're finding, the wasted with that USAID has found it. And if they just would have taken that money and made our country better and built our infrastructure, put people to work, did the things that they should have done, how much better our country would be. They should all be ashamed of themselves. They all should be. I mean, it's all criminal if you ask me. And I do also pray for the safety of this administration, for Trump and Musk, and I wish them Godspeed, to be honest with you. It's about time that we finally get to see exactly where our tax dollars are going and how irresponsible this policy, fiscal policy, and lack of any morals have gone into all of this. I won't go on my soapbox, but I will tell you over the last 4 years, more than the fiscal irresponsibility, the monetary foolhardy policy, it's been the lack of morals, moving away from a meritocracy to one based on lifestyle, the questioning of all of the things of integrity, judicial, electoral, immigration, etc., FBI. As a side note, I've done 2 interviews with Kash Patel, might be the smartest guy I've ever talked to. No disrespect to you, because you can hold your hat with anyone, but I will tell you, this guy looks right into your soul when you talk to him and you ask him a question. Bang, he's got an answer that's, whoa, where'd you pull that out from? And I would love for him to go in and start to do these things, and to have Ron Paul come in and audit the Fed and to audit the Pentagon, and just to see how repugnant things have truly gotten, while at the same time they've let our country decay, and the infrastructure decay, and put us, I mean, you haven't even talked about the electrical grid or any of these things that should have been addressed a long, long time ago. I saw you talking about that as well. I would recommend everyone, maybe you can mention, what is the name of the YouTube that you sent me? It's called Your Swan Song. I think everyone should watch it. I learned a lot from it, a lot of your views, but actually learned a lot about things I didn't know. What is the name of that video?
Oh, it's I just spoke at what's called the 2025 World Outlook Conference. So I guess if you Google Peter Grandich and World Outlook Conference, that video will come up. There's a YouTube channel that if they just go to YouTube, put my name, they can watch all the interviews and all. Can I just add one thing before we run out of time about that? What irks me the most?
Yeah, because I only have one more question to ask you, but I just want people to know it was fantastic. Go watch it. Go ahead, please.
Like it. Think about this. The place that was responsible for all this, that was supposed to oversee and bring oversight to all this money that's clearly gone, and I don't think it's just the last 4 years, I think they're going to trace it back for decades, is the House of Congress and the Senate. These are the people that we elect and hopefully will be responsible. There's all these committees and all that kind of stuff. We should have known something's wrong when these folks go in making 100 to 200,000 a year and come out worth tens to 20 to $50 million or more themselves. So the whole game from top to bottom will have to be totally changed.
Are you saying to me that Paul Pelosi isn't one of the most legendary investors in the world, that he actually might have known something?
Well, how do they do it? Just time in and time out. You and I
know.
You and I, and most people watching this know how difficult this is if you have to play on the fair side of the market and all. And yet, we know that what's gone on. But think about that. These all had oversight committees. All these departments had inspector generals, people that job was supposed to make sure these things weren't happening. And that's the sad part, because you know what? For a lot of years, and this includes the dollar and everything, we used to make fun of what we call banana republics. We're one ourselves now.
Yes, we are, by every metric. Debt to GDP, and you throw in the questioning of the election integrity and throwing your political adversaries in jail. Yeah, I mean, we were certainly heading down that path in terms of our indebtedness. Anything over 100% debt to GDP was always considered that. We're close to 130, a line that once crossed, no one's ever come back from. As a side, there's a guy on YouTube that I love. His name is Jay Bravo. I consider him a friend. I consider him a genius. He's brilliant. And I've never noticed him to say anything sensational and that he couldn't back up. Now, I haven't been able to substantiate what he said a few days ago, but he said that the Clinton Foundation received $285 billion, and it was all supposed to go to, or maybe it was $1 million, $285 million. It was all supposed to go to Haiti. And evidently 3 million went to Chelsea Clinton's wedding and 10 to her mansion. Now, I haven't heard anyone say anything about it. I haven't substantiated. And this guy is a straightforward shooter, and he's phenomenal. If things like that are true and they come out, I just hope they do. It's enough already. It's enough what's happened to this country. And to let our infrastructure, like you say, crumble to where it presents a real safety risk to the public. And we're giving money away around the world for stupid reasons and stupid causes. it just needs to be exposed. We do need a reset morally. We need a reset, not just financially and economically. We need to reset and go back to the ideals that we all grew up being proud of, because it seems like we've certainly gone astray from that. I appreciate you saying this stuff, Peter. It really resonates with me. I hope it does to everyone else. Last question, and I'll let you go. Looking back, speaking of Trump, do you think his legacy, his economic legacy, will be viewed as a period of prosperity or a precursor into severe economic challenges?
Here's the one thing I say. So my wife is a Trumpster. In fact, I think she would leave me if Trump said to leave me. Okay, that's how much she's involved with it all. I voted for the man. I don't think it was too hard between the two choices I had in that regard. But the one thing I will say to him and defend him tonight is he's one of the only politicians that I know, other than one person on a much smaller scale, and a local politician, that literally did what he said he was going to do. And just, like him or not, and I think that's what pisses off the other side the most is that he does what he said he was going to do. And that's really what you're voted on. Listen, he's taken, the mandate was by the people. This is what they want. And the Democrats are just foolish. They're going more against it. But that's because he's now at the core. It was one thing to lose to him, but now you want to take away my gravy train. That's what they're really upset about. And let me make one comment. I don't normally comment like this, but you brought up the Clintons. When the Biden stuff was happening and all the scandals, someone asked me, what do you think the Clintons would say? I'd say they only have one word about them: amateurs.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Well, let's hope all this comes to light. You're the kind of guy that I would love to sit and have a couple of scotches with, or just sit and pick your brain for hours. There is no substitute for wisdom, for experience. And on top of that, I think anyone who watches you for 5 minutes can tell you're a hell of a guy. You're a good person. I'm honored to call you a friend. I appreciate so much that you would come on my show. I always love coming on yours. I can't say enough about you and your character, your wisdom, and what you have to say, not just about numbers, but about a bigger picture. And you love sports too, like I do. I could pick your brain for hours, but it's been almost an hour, so I'm going to let you run. Peter, what's the best way to people to follow you, whether it be on social media or YouTube?
Yes.
And I think everyone should do it. I do it. What's the best way to follow you?
Well, my X page, that's where I spend a good bit of time. I do put up I'll put up this interview, any interviews I do, then the people I speak to, which as soon as we go off the air, I'm booking you to have that discussion, because maybe I could be the first to have you talk about it. But so there's the X page, there's a YouTube, and then there's my website, petergrandich.com. I'm still part of a financial planning group that deals with cash flow efficiencies here in the U.S. for just U.S. residents. But let me just please also close this way. I can't begin to tell you how important you were for keeping me on the right side of the track, Andy. And I think I'm speaking for a lot of people. I get a lot of people send me emails after I've done interviews about you. Wow, this guy's this. And I hear this from others, and I see where you are and all. Consider yourself thankful, and your father put you in the right thing. My father said to me a lot of things. He says, if you don't have your integrity, you cannot get enough things to replace it. And you're a man of integrity. Now, a lot of people don't like what you have to say, and I've learned that about myself because I tie my faith into my business. And I know that causes jealousy and envy and hatred and things of that nature. But thank God for you, sir. I have to tell you, I might have not held on and profited the way I did if I didn't catch that original interview and been listening to you. So you stay well as well. And if I ever do make it to the East Coast of Florida, you're the first person I'm stopping at.
Yeah, if you were right here, I'd give you a hug and a kiss on the cheek, Peter. You've made my day. Like I said, to hear such wonderful things from a person like you makes everything I've ever done in this industry worthwhile. And I'm dead serious on that. Honest to God, bottom of my heart, thank you very much. And I will look forward to picking up on where we left off on your show. I think I'm on to something. I really do. and I'm not afraid to say it. So for what it's worth, thanks, Peter, on multiple levels, and look forward to talking with you again soon, my friend.
God bless you, my friend.
God bless you as well.
Little by Little with Andy Schechtman.